This is PM Agenda. Thanks very much for your company. With me now, the Shadow Foreign Minister, Tanya Plibersek. Thank you so much for your time. I want to start off with this very concerning situation in Ukraine. The Trade Minister's visit has been cancelled. This is on Australia's part in protest. Do you support that move?
Yes, I think it's very important to send a very strong message to Russia that Australia is united in our opposition to any unilateral moves moving troops into Crimea or other parts of Russia. Certainly there's been strong messages sent from the United Nations Secretary General, from the United States, from Canada, from NATO countries, and Australia, on both sides of politics, we're very concerned about the most recent moves.
Australia signed a nuclear cooperation agreement with Russia back in 2010. Should there be a rethink of those uranium exports?
Look, the situation's evolving very quickly on the ground. I think it's very important that Australia sends a strong message, particularly as a member of the United Nations Security Council, but what further steps we should take in concert with the international community is something that we should decide with the international community, within the Security Council, within the United Nations framework.
Hugh White of the ANU, Professor White, has written that the Ukrainian crisis will highlight an inability of the US to respond. And he says China may see reason to become bolder in confrontation with its neighbours. What do you make of that assessment?
I read that article this morning. I think it was a very interesting article. I guess the other way of looking at what Hugh White said is that this is an opportunity for Europe, and in particular for NATO countries, to show unity of purpose and to be very clear in the type of behaviour that they expect in their region. I think one of the big concerns of this situation is we don't want to get into a situation where there's a winner and a loser. I think if there is conflict, if conflict heightens, we are all losers. If we can manage as an international community to de-escalate tensions, to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to set their own direction, to choose their own government, and to, of course, protect all of the citizens of the Ukraine living within Ukraine's borders, then that's a win for everyone. So I don't think we should be looking at this in zero-sum game terms.
What do you make of the statement from the Russian ambassador after he was called into the Department of Foreign Affairs today for an explanation as to what's going on? He says that Russia has a right to protect its interests in Ukraine, including, well, as the President of Russia has said, Russian-speaking people in that area.
I think Russian-speaking people, and there are many in Crimea and in the eastern part of Ukraine, deserve all of the protections of a citizen of Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government must, of course, make sure that Russian-speaking citizens are protected, their rights are protected, and that they can live confidently in their homes.
Let's move on to the issue of China. The Prime Minister today announced the largest ever business delegation will accompany the Trade Minister, and he will be there as well early in April. Now, he says that Australia can walk and chew gum at the same time when it comes to the relationship with China, that you can make robust representations on some issues, but also have a prosperous and growing economic relationship. Do you accept that?
I think that that's been the basis of our relationship with China for a long time. We've had a very long and strong relationship with China, and there have always been times when Australia, for example, has expressed concerns about human rights issues, for example. It is important that friends speak openly and honestly to one another. We have traditionally had good relationships with China, with the United States, with Japan, with South Korea, with Indonesia. We haven't in the past sought to rank or grade our friendships, and one of the things that has worried me more lately is that it has seemed like we were backing ourselves into a corner as a nation that meant a close relationship with the United States meant that we needed to distance ourselves from China. I think the exact opposite is true. We can have good relations with both, and in fact our good relations with both make us a more valuable partner for each.
The Prime Minister said that Japan was a strong ally. That did not go down very well, apparently, in Beijing. Do you think that that has been the source of some of the, well, the rudeness is the way a Department of Foreign Affairs official described it at Senate estimates last week. The First Assistant Secretary of the North Asia Division said the treatment of the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, was the rudest he has seen in 30 years. Do you think that was the source of that treatment? What's behind that?
I think people who watch this relationship have seen a number of missteps. I think talking about Japan as an ally when technically they're not, they're our very good friend in Asia, of course they are, and we have a long and good relationship with Japan, but they're not technically an ally of Australia. And most particularly, I think the way that the Chinese ambassador was called in here and then a press statement issued, a very humiliating way of treating the Chinese ambassador here in Australia has not contributed to good relations. I think the Foreign Minister making a point of saying that China was not our most important trading relationship or economic relationship, all of these things build up. I don't think it's one thing or another
what's wrong with
particular.
On that point of calling in the Chinese ambassador, what's wrong with that? Particularly when you look at the air defence zone that Julie Bishop was making her, Australia's concerns known about. That was done unilaterally by China with no consultation of anyone in the region over those disputed islands of the Senkaku or the Diaoyu, as the Chinese call it. That's entirely reasonable.
Well, Australia's traditionally not taken a position on this territorial dispute over the islands, and I think it's very important that our position remains that we want to see any territorial disputes discussed and worked out through negotiation in clearly defined in the terms that international law would clearly define. I think making sudden or unilateral moves is not desirable from China or from Japan.
But that's what Julie Bishop was saying. That's all she did, wasn't it?
No, I think that the statement went beyond that, and I think when we have discussions with our neighbours, we don't always put out press releases about it. There's a sensitive issue here where China clearly feels that we are taking sides in a dispute where we have not traditionally taken sides. I think it's very important that we continue to say that we're not taking our side in the territorial dispute, and we urge calm. We urge de-escalation of any conflict, and we urge the parties to talk openly to one another.
Well, Julie Bishop would argue that that's what she did, though, by expressing her concern and the government's concern about that unilateral action of China. She was criticised for doing it, but why shouldn't a sovereign country like Australia make known concerns like that? Moves, unilateral moves, some saw as aggressive moves, just like we're seeing on the Black Sea Peninsula right now at a much greater level.
I guess just like we're seeing in the Black Sea Peninsula, what we don't want to get into is zero-sum game politics, where we are picking sides, we're elevating relationships or ranking relationships. We're saying our best friend, our best ally, our biggest trading partner. Our interests as an important country, but not a large one in terms of population, is to have good relations with all our neighbours, and we've managed to do that in the past. We've managed to be very close to the United States, very close to China, very close to Japan, close to Indonesia and India, other countries in our regions, and it is not in our interests to be ranking and grading our friendships in the way that we have.
Now, finally, you've written to coalition MPs expressing the fact that you're going to introduce a private members bill on same-sex marriage. Have you had any response from the coalition side at this point?
No, not yet. And I hope that backbenchers in particular will consider co-sponsoring the bill. Labor Party members will have a conscience vote on any changes to the Marriage Act, and the first and most important step is getting the Prime Minister to allow coalition MPs to have a conscience vote as well. There are, we know, members of the coalition who are supportive of marriage equality, but without the confirmation from the Prime Minister that there'll be no retaliation if they should vote for marriage equality, we certainly don't expect to see numbers crossing the floor. So first and most important step, Tony Abbott, he's always talked about coalition MPs being more open to conscience votes than Labor MPs. We would like to see that in action.
And finally, Adam Bandt of the Greens said he hoped this wasn't just a stunt before Mardi Gras. What do you say to him on those comments?
Well, it's a pretty slow stunt. I telegraphed I was doing this in late last year. I think it was December last year. So I guess if I was trying on a stunt, I'd hope not to telegraph it.
It would have been
6 months
better.
out.
Yeah. Tony Plibersek, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
A quick break on PM Agenda. We'll be right back.